Okay. Hi, my name is Anja Radaljac and I'm co-editor of Animo. And today here with me is philosopher, writer, and editor Leonardo Caffo from Italy. Leonardo, could you at first just tell us a little bit about yourself and your work in the field of animal ethics and critical animal studies, just so our audience can get a little bit more familiar with you and your work?
So first of all, thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As you know, I was also an editor of a magazine with the same name of yours, no, Animo. That, of course, is an Italian magazine, so it's published just in Italiano. So now I'm not the chief director, but the magazine already exists. So I'm happy because we are both editor or former editor of a journal that is called Animo. So, by the way, I am more or less a philosopher, so it's impossible to, define yourself as a philosopher. It's really too much. But of course, my background is philosophy, and since when I was a bachelor student here at the State University of Milano, one of my, so how can I say, cup of tea, okay, was since the beginning, okay, our relationship with the others. And the others, not just in the sense of others humans, of course, but the others after the critical deconstruction of the concept of anthropocentrism. And this is also the reason why I think that one of the most interesting outputs of critical human animal studies is, of course, animal ethics, okay? So I think that for everyone, it's difficult to stay in the framework of animal studies because we are in a super anthropocentric academic system and so on. I suppose that is the same also in your country. But if you try to stay more in, how can I say, metaphysics with some outputs in animal studies, it's easier, okay? But of course, for me, because I'm not just a philosopher, but I'm also an activist, okay? So it's also super important to explore the condition of what is like to be an animal in our contemporary society. That, of course, it's a super sad condition, no? Because if you are a non-human animal, not just non-human, but also if you are a human that it's, how can I say, in a condition where it's possible to use the metaphor of animality to define a human, no? So if you are a woman, for example, or if you are in a black condition or so on, usually we can use this device to deconstruct the human condition using some animals metaphors and so on. So, and but of course, if you are a non-human animal technically, so someone that exists outside the borders of our species, so our contemporary society and the capitalistic society, it's like the hell, no? And I think that it's impossible for someone that want to define his or herself as a philosopher, how can I say, so the chance to understand that this is one of the more important and interesting philosophical question of the contemporaries in front of our face every day, no? How you can study moral philosophy without understanding something about animals' condition. It's impossible, no? So if you want, I think that animal studies or human animal studies, or as you prefer, okay? So it's something that it's mandatory if you want to stay in philosophy as a field of research. Okay, it's not just a choice. It's up to every philosopher. This is my opinion.
Yes, well, that's very interesting, I think, because the question of animal it's been present in philosophy, at least in European philosophy, but as we know, in other philosophies as well, uh, since ancient times. Like it's always been there. But just in the 20th century in Europe, we saw this switch, like the non-human turn switch in philosophy, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how this turn came to be in Italy specifically. Like, you wrote an article, Speciesism and the Ideology of Domination in Italian philosophy, philosophical tradition. I'm sorry. Yes, and of course we have Caligieri in your country, and I was interested in just getting to know a little bit more about how this question was evolving in recent decades in Italy.
So so it's true that the animal question was part of philosophical debate since, I don't know, ancient times of Plato and so on. But it's false that was the same question, because so as a moral question, it's something that exists inside something that, if you want, we can define as a political atmosphere, and after the capitalistic turn, the animal question was completely another story, because the point is not just, or it's also, but it's not just our relationship with animals, but also our economical position in terms of anthropocentrism, and it's also the idea that for us animals are like machines, and we can use the bodies of the animals like I don't know, a pen or something like that. So the idea that a subject could be an object inside some economical condition, that of course it's clear that the point is the capitalistic turn, And this is also the reason why, since I don't know, Peter Singer, Animal Liberation, and so colleagues like Tom Regan, Paola Cavalieri, that was a co-author with Peter, of some books that are super important for our story, but it's clear that animal turn is something that is not just is something that exists not just because it's important from a philosophical point of view, but also because it's super relevant from a political point of view, because our society is completely a society where it's impossible to have a good relationship with animals. So the condition of the society is in opposition with the possibility to have an ecological condition or something like that. So it's a contradiction. And this is the reason why philosophy is also the tool to understand how we can solve and fix this kind of thing. So it's a problem that, so if you want, it's up to economy, politics, but just philosopher can solve something, because it's a logical problem, if you want. It's impossible to stay in a good position, in a moral condition with other animals, if you want to stay also in a capitalistic society. It's completely impossible. So, and Italy, of course, is in Europe, so more or less the output of animal turn in Europe was super relevant also for us, but not immediately as usual in the universities or in academic context, but first of all in a sort of bubble that, so if you want, we can define the intellectual activism or something like that. Okay, so, and this is also the reason why Paola Cavalieri, she's not a professor of philosophy, she's just an activist. Okay, and it's strange, because she's a philosopher that published with Columbia University Press and so on, but she can't have a position as a professor in an academic context like the Italian context. Okay, because I don't know, 25 years ago, so the animal ethics was just something for anarchist movement or for activists that so you can find in some place like, how can I say, social center, so place not official place but place for discussion, for activism, and this is also the reason why was super interesting, because outside the rules of university, outside the rules of academic context, was also possible to explore in every case, in every possibilities and condition, this new field of research, and so in Italy was super interesting also the, how can I say, the editorial explosion, was full of independent journals and magazines like Liberazioni, critical antispeciesist journal. This is the copy of the magazine Liberazioni, and I was part of the editorial committee. Others magazine like Etica Animali, so the magazine of Paola Cavalieri, where also Peter Singer and Tom Regan. So was a sort of lab, lab for animal ethics or something like that, and also others magazine like Animal Studies, but first of all was field of research of some how can I say, association of animal rights movement, and after, I don't know, 10 years was also possible to see something also in some department of philosophy, like for example in State University of Milano, where I was a student during the bachelor, but never with official courses, but just with seminars, something that was impossible to define as an official subject, but something that was interesting but not so interesting. So now the situation is completely different. So it's full of activists. There are also professors, PhD students, or postdoc in different departments like Milano, Torino, Verona, Venezia, because as we know, also animal ethics, more or less now, it's an official part of philosophy, both analytic philosophy and the continental philosophy, European philosophy. This kind of distinction was also important in Italy, because if, for example, if you want to read something about animal ethics in the Italian debate, so it's easier that you can find some animal ethics philosopher inside analytics philosophy department, as usual, because it was a sort of consequence of Peter Singer philosophical approach, So it's just a debate about which kind of condition we need to use to justify a different treatment of animals and so on. So utilitarianism, contractualism, like, I don't know, roles in a sort of new animalistic framework. And on the other hand, it's full of some philosophers that, if you want, you can call the Italian theory philosophers, like French theory in French, with Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze, that, as you know, this is not a list of activist or animalist philosopher or something like that, but just of philosopher where also animal studies is a part of a research project, and also in Italy we have something like that. So it's full of philosophers that think that animal study it's a part of metaphysics, but not that it's something that we need to explore also in an ethical revolution of our society. So Italy was really full of movements, activists, and so on about this kind of research and ethical project, if you want, because so probably a good definition of animal ethics is an ethical project, so something to redesign and reshape completely the roots of our society, especially in the north of Italy, And but by the way, if you need to write a sort of history of animal ethics in Italy, so the starting point was the main association of animal rights, LAV, anti-vivisection movement, and also the translation of international PETA in Italy. And from a philosophical point of view, the most important thing was the starting point of Paola Cavalieri with Etica Animali, Ethics and Animals, the journal about animal ethics, and after, in a more radical way, because as we know, Peter Singer is not a radical philosopher, he's just a philosopher that thinks that we need to extend our moral position to others human, but in a more radical way. Was super interesting the foundation of Liberazioni and others magazine about radical philosophical approach. So for example, the connection between gender studies and animal studies, black studies and animal studies, history of anarchism and the animal condition, Marxism studies, and the possibility to use animal studies to reshape Marxism in the contemporary philosophy and so on. And this is also the contemporary debate. So for me, for example, but my position is strange because I'm not really an animal studies philosopher. I'm just a philosopher that thinks that animal studies, it's a mandatory research field if you want to define yourself as a philosopher. And so for me, the point is, how can we destroy the anthropocentristic bubble? And of course, animal ethics and animal studies are both tools and instruments to destroy this bubble. Not just alone, how can I say? We know also to use gender studies, black studies, disability studies, ecological studies. So it's impossible to work alone in the dark, okay? So the point is how we can destroy the power as a device to control the bodies of the others, okay? So it's not important for me if the body that I have in front of me is your body or a body of a pig or a dog. So for me, if you are a body and if you can live without, okay, my violence, okay, it's mandatory for me to respect the borders between my body and your body. Stop. So if you are a human animal, a pig animal, a dog animal, is not important for me. So in Italy, it's full of literature about this kind of thing. Unfortunately, it's not easy to see translations, because in Italy we have this tradition to translate English to Italian, but not Italian into English. So, for example, I have some books and papers in English, like Contemporary Posthuman, Art for the Others, and so on, but a lot of my books are just in Italian, or in Spanish, or in French. Because this is also our history as a country, you know, we are full of translators from English to Italiano, but not from Italiano into English, no? But this is, I'm super happy to speak with you, because I think that the only solution that we have as animal rights movement is to stay in a global condition. So we can't fight our enemy, just speak country by country, because the point is not the Slovenian government or the Italian government. So the point is the device of anthropocentrism everywhere. And this is also the reason why we need to stay together, no? So something that it's also important for me to say, but I think that it's the same also in your country, that animal rights movement was full of different position with some internal fights, and I think that this is the most stupid thing, okay? Because the idea that my organization is better than yours, it's stupid if your enemy is the same, okay? So we need to organize something to stay together, to understand how we can speak against the power to destroy the power with the instrument of the power. No, it's a dialectical movement. This is the point.
Thank you. Well, I was thinking when you were talking about the political aspect, of course, this is the distinction between animal studies and critical animal studies, because the critical animal studies were, of course, developed with just this political notion in mind, because there was this problem, as you mentioned, that there was a lot of like discussion and thinking about the question of animal, but only on a theoretical way that did not connect with any practice or any political issue, like as you mentioned, with post-structuralist philosophers. And I was wondering, in relation to this, you are speaking about weak antispeciesism and political antispeciesism, and maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that, because it's a super important distinction, and I believe this would be something we would like to know more about.
Yes, so was the debate between weak antispeciesism and political antispeciesism was super important in our country, something like 10 years ago, during the first phase of animal rights movement as an intellectual movement in our country, you know? And so the idea was that it's my idea, that it's not necessary to speak or to say or to fight for the animals just because if you fight for animals, you can also help, I don't know, environment or others categories. From a logical point of view, this kind of argument, it's called indirect argument. The idea that you can fight for someone just because it's relevant for others subject in relation with the condition of the first subject of your fight. No? And this is also the idea in Italy of political antispeciesism. So if you fight for the animals, you can also help the environment, the woman's condition, and so on. So my idea was that, especially at the starting point of our movement, was super necessary to stress the point that animals are important like animals. And it's important to defend and to fight for the animals also if it's just for the animals. So of course, probably it's also helpful for the environment condition and for a lot of others indirect stuff. Okay, it's clear if you want. But so if you can try to translate the argument of political antispeciesism from animals to others categories of discrimination process, like, I don't know, girls, for example, no? So you immediately understand that it's impossible to think that it's a good way to argue for someone. Because if I tell you that it's important to destroy sexism just because also men's, okay, are in a problematic way if sexism exists, but girls are not important as subjects, just because if I can fight for girls, I can also have some rights for me. So your reaction probably will be, you are really stupid and this is bullshit. Okay, this is the only thing that you can think, I suppose. Okay, so and if you use the same argument for others subject and you immediately understand that it's a terrible argument, you can also need to understand that if antispeciesism is a good theory, so it's false that exists a strong moral border between us and other animals, animals. So this kind of argument, it's also the reason why we need to use something like weak antispeciesism. That is also also a sort of logical device, you know? If I can fight just for animals because animals are important, it's also the only way to destroy anthropocentrism. Because if I fight for animals just because it's also helpful for us, this is a way to it's prima facie a way to destroy anthropocentrism. It's a way to transform anthropocentrism in something that it's bigger than before. Okay, you can think, for example, some position like transhumanism and so on that are super anthropocentristic position, no? Because okay, we can put animals in another box, but we are more important than the animals. So this is not my goal. My goal is that, like the female condition, like the black condition, like the disability condition, the animal condition, it's something that is relevant as an animal condition. Of course, sometimes as a tool. You can also use an indirect argument to, I don't know, because you are in a environmental studies congress, and it's also helpful for you to show some data, like so the pollution of an animal slaughterhouse, it's super dangerous for the environment, of course. Every one of us knows that it's true, but it's not our point. If we are animal ethics philosophers or activists and so on. So this distinction between weak antispeciesism and political antispeciesism was quite important for us 10 years ago, more or less, more than 10 years probably, but by the way, because it was also easy to write a sort of manifesto that was helpful also to speak with journalists, to speak with television, to speak with, I don't know, doctors during some congress about vivisection and so on, okay? And I think that it's really relevant also today, because after the environmental turn, now, Greta Thunberg and so on everywhere, okay, so the idea that environment is the most important things. If you think, so animals are completely in an absent condition in this debate. So environment is super important, but if you want to speak, okay, so, and the animals, because animals are the environment, okay, so we are in an overlap condition. How you can save the environment, destroying the life of the environment? And so the reaction of the public is, okay, but I believe in environmental studies, but animal ethics is not my cup of tea. And we need to show the contradiction. And how we can show the contradiction, defending the idea that animal ethics is relevant also if, for example, just to conceive a mental experiment, also if is in opposition with environmental studies. And this is, for example, the idea of an important philosopher that is called Oscar Horta, is one of the most interesting living philosopher about animal ethics, and it's also a professor in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And the idea of Oscar is, so probably animal ethics, it's in opposition with environmental studies for a lot of reasons, but it's not up to us, because if we think that animals are important as animals, so this is our goal, this is our philosophical condition, and this is also our battle. This is the point.
Okay, thank you. I believe we have like a few minutes left, and I would just like to ask one more question, because we were talking a lot about how an animal question is a political question. And maybe could you tell us a little bit about non-human animals as political agents? So in what way do you see non-human animals as political agents? And if yes, in what way? And how can we have 10 minutes left. I just got the notification.
So very briefly, of course, and thanks. So animals are everywhere, not just in our food or dressed, or I don't know, okay? So animals are everywhere in the capitalistic society, okay? Are in some technical device of our smartphone, are in the materials for building a house, are really everywhere. So an animal is a stone of our capitalistic society. So it's super easy to understand why animal studies is a political issue, because it's impossible to transform, reshape, so if you want to speak about a revolution, it's completely another story. But just also if you want to reshape or redesign some social rules. So how you can redesign some social rules without using the animal position. And of course, an animal, if you want to stay with me in this joke, an animal, it's also a subject that wants something, okay? So it's a political subject, just because if you have consciousness, if you have your volunteer, if you have your desire, if you have your dreams, for example, okay, of course that you are a political agent. Like it's a political agent, a super little child, okay, before the consciousness turn, or I don't know, an old man after something that was dangerous for his brain. Okay, so everybody's, okay, it's a political agent. So we need to stay in this position to not to speak for the animals, because it's again an anthropocentristic point, but to speak with the animals and to understand the desire, the dream, the future of the animals, because we are in the same circle, okay? And if you want, you can call this circle everyday life. And it's the same for me, for a dog, for a pig, for a bird, and for you.
Yes, thank you. There's also, I would just like to point this out before we end. There's also non-human animals, like their own fight, like they're also fighting against the oppressions, and I think that's really important to stress out, because there's still a lot of the arguments like they are not organizing, like in the Marxist sense, but they are fighting back, and this is something that I believe it's important to say. Thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure. It was great to chat with you and to learn more about how the animal rights movement was developing in Italy. And I hope we will collaborate in other ways also in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And see you soon, I hope.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.